Hello Magic Makers, welcome to Storytime with Mombierella. This is a young adult fiction and may be inappropriate for some younger audiences. Mother Knows Best, A Tale of the Old Witch by Serena Valentino. Copyright Disney Enterprises Incorporated, 2018. Chapter 25. The Bloody Chamber. It had been weeks since Gothel ventured to the kingdom, leaving Mrs. Tittlebottom alone to manage the house and be the keeper of the keys. Gothel had given her the keys to the cellar and the library to add to her ring of household keys, but told her not to enter either room. Mrs. Tittlebottom felt like the French fairy tale bride, who was given the keys to the chateau and told she was welcome to enter any room she wished except one. Of course, the French bride did it anyway, but that is another story altogether. Unlike the French bride, Mrs. Tittlebottom didn't want to know what was in the cellar. The way she figured it, the less she knew, the better. Oh, she had her theories, and if she'd allowed herself to sit down and think about it, she would have put it all together, and in reality, she had, but she chose to put it out of her mind. Over the years, Mrs. Tittlebottom had become very good at avoiding trouble. She wasn't about to go falling into a deep pit of it now, because that was what she foresaw, trouble. Not that she was a witch and saw things in that way, but she had common sense, and could see Gothel was about to bring trouble upon all of their heads. No need to make more trouble by going into that cellar. I don't need to know what's in there. Besides, she knew what happened to the bride in that French fairy tale when she entered the forbidden room. She lost her head when her husband came home, and ended up in the bloody chamber with his other headless brides. The memory of that story gave Mrs. Tittlebottom the shivers. Thinking of those poor girls' bodies hung on rusty hooks in that room, their heads sitting under bell jars. Put it out of your mind, she told herself. She didn't think Gothel would do such a thing to her, but Mrs. Tittlebottom had made it her business not to go around tempting fate, or getting her head chopped off. Not if she could help it. Fairy tales are written for a reason, she told herself. They were cautionary tales, and Mrs. Tittlebottom might have been an old woman, but she wasn't stupid. She spent most of her days busying herself with the baking of pies and cakes. The kitchen was bursting with them. But she found that baking calmed her nerves. And she was, after all, very worried about Gothel. More weeks passed than she supposed might for Gothel to travel to the kingdom and back. And still, there was no sign of Gothel. So Mrs. Tittlebottom baked some more pies, and even more cakes, and gave them to everyone who would take them. And just when Mrs. Tittlebottom was beginning to worry that something terrible had happened to her lady, Gothel arrived with a baby in her arms, just like it was any other day. "And who is this?" Mrs. Tittlebottom asked, looking at the beautiful little creature in Gothel's arms. "This is my flower," said Gothel. "We should probably find someone to care for her until she's older." She handed the baby over to Mrs. Tittlebottom like she was a sack of potatoes. "Your flower looks an awful lot like a baby." "A baby whose mother ate my flower." "You mean this is the princess? Gothel, what in fairy wings are you thinking of taking this baby?" "I didn't have a choice. What would you have me do?" "Her father's army destroyed my kingdom for something that didn't belong to them, and gave it to his queen, who bequeathed it to this creature. She's the only flower left. If my mother were alive, she would have destroyed them and their entire kingdom. They're lucky the only thing I took was their child." "I don't know about that, Gothel. What must they be feeling now? It's one thing to take your flower back, but to take their child, I just don't know," said Mrs. Tittlebottom. "She is my flower, the only one left of its kind. They destroyed almost everything I had and took my only hope of ever seeing my sisters alive again. They're not the victims here, Mrs. T. I am." Gothel could see Mrs. Tittlebottom wanted to ask her what she meant about her sisters, but stopped herself. She seemed to be considering Gothel's words for some time while looking at the little wriggling creature in her arms. Finally she spoke. "And what should we call her?" "Rapunzel," said Gothel, walking away from the old woman and the child, and descending into the cellar without even looking back. "Well then," said Mrs. Tittlebottom to the baby. "Well, what are we going to do with you? We can't very well hire some gossipy wet nurse. Not when it's certain. You've been spirited away from the royal family." Gothel had become more reclusive since the odd sister's last visit, and since the situation, as Mrs. Tittlebottom had called it. And she became even more so after she brought Rapunzel into their lives. She spent most of her time either down in the cellar or in her library. She would pop out once a day, take the baby into her arms,
sing her a little song, and then rush back to whatever she was up to in the cellar. With the help of her sister, Mrs. Tittlebottom found a wet nurse for Rapunzel, one she paid handsomely to keep quiet about the baby. Mrs. Tittlebottom had made up a story about one of Gothel's sisters having the child out of wedlock, and said that was the reason for the secrecy. Mrs. Tittlebottom thought it was the perfect ruse. She knew her sister wouldn't be able to keep the secret and would spread it far and wide. Gothel's sisters were often mentioned by wagging tongues in the village, and Mrs. Tittlebottom made sure Lady Gothel was made out to be some sort of saint for taking on her sister's burden. By all accounts, everyone in the village thought Gothel was like a fairy godmother to the child. Mrs. Tittlebottom had made sure they paid Mrs. Pickle, the wet nurse, well, promising her the position of governess once the baby was older. And Mrs. Pickle was a marvel, which was a miracle to Mrs. Tittlebottom, who needed more help than ever around the house. Mrs. Tittlebottom often thought Mrs. Pickle had been sent to her from the gods to help raise the baby. And Mrs. Pickle was happy to have a child and a family to care for, and a place to call home. She took the small room upstairs and shared it with Rapunzel, so she would never be too far away from the child. She watched her like a hawk and was ferociously protective of her. She never spoke of it, not even with Mrs. Tittlebottom, but the old woman knew that the poor Mrs. Pickle had lost her family in some tragic way, and that she was happy to have a means to occupy her time and fill her broken heart. And so it went for many years while Rapunzel grew and flourished under the care of those doting women. Mrs. Tittlebottom stuffed her with treats and smothered her with kisses on every opportunity, and Mrs. Pickle saw to her meals, baths, and daily excursions through the wildflower fields, always careful not to venture too far away from the home, lest Lady Gothel would become anxious. And every day like clockwork, Gothel would swoop in on the child, once nightly before her bedtime, to sing her a song and brush her hair, and then she would go directly back into the cellar, where she would spend her nights. If it hadn't been for the child, Mrs. Tittlebottom likely would have left the household. Her mistress had become so peculiar, and she was so artificial when she spoke to the child, calling herself Mother, singing that same song, and never calling the girl by her name, always calling her my flower. It was all too odd for Mrs. Tittlebottom, all too morbid. She couldn't help wondering how Rapunzel's parents had felt, how they must be missing their little girl. But she didn't dare bring it up to Gothel, who by the years resembled her sisters Ruby, Martha, and Lucinda more than ever. Gothel had taken to wearing her hair in ringlets, and painting her face the way she remembered seeing those odd sisters of hers painting theirs on their last visit. It was as if she were trying to conjure them by dressing like them, a form of sympathetic magic. Gothel went on and on about bringing her sisters back, when she saw fit to speak to Mrs. Tittlebottom at all, which brought Mrs. Tittlebottom nothing but confusion and vexation. But she decided to keep her thoughts to herself and focus her energy on giving little Rapunzel all the love and care she deserved, because she surely wasn't getting it from her supposed mother. Mrs. Tittlebottom felt more than ever that she was an old woman trapped within a fairy tale, and the last thing she wanted was to end up hanging on a rusty hook in the bloody chamber, or in a cellar. And the very last thing she wanted was her head to end up in a bell jar. No, that wouldn't do. Not at all. Not for Mrs. Tittlebottom.
Thank you so much for listening. Please remember, like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, share with a friend, comment down below. And remember, let it go and keep moving forward. Have a magical day. Bye.